Incongruity resolution explains exactly why jokes trigger laughter. But what is physically happening inside your brain? To process the world safely and quickly, your mind is constantly predicting what will happen next. Take this classic setup from a famous joke. The three hardest things to say are, number 1, I was wrong, and number 2, I need help. Those first two lines build a highly predictable mental path, a serious mental script focused entirely on emotional vulnerability. But then the punchline hits you. Number 3, Worcestershire sauce. This unexpected phrase crashes into your established emotional script, triggering a sudden, jarring spike of psychological tension. To fix this broken prediction, your brain rapidly backtracks through the text and uncovers a completely hidden second script, a literal list of words that are physically hard to pronounce. The physical act of laughter is just the psychological relief of resolving that tension and successfully switching scripts. And that Worcestershire sauce punchline proves your brain successfully debugged a reality glitch.
What happens in your brain the exact moment a joke lands? It's a process called incongruity resolution. We used to think we just laughed at people's misfortune, but humor is actually a high-speed cognitive puzzle. Take this classic prank. You release 4 pigs in a supermarket, but first, you paint the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 5 on their backs. Your brain immediately builds a standard mental script, a simple story about 4 numbered animals running around. But then, a piece of information breaks that expectation. Where is pig number 4? This missing piece creates a sudden burst of psychological tension. Then the punchline hits. You sit back and watch security desperately search for number 4. Your brain is forced to backtrack, instantly snapping to a hidden dramatic second script. That physical act of laughter, it's just your body's biological relief from successfully resolving that cognitive friction between the 2 incompatible tracks. And that missing 4th pig, the tension clears the exact second your brain realizes it doesn't matter, because the pigs were never the actual joke. The panicked security guards were.
Okay, let's dive right into this fascinating explainer by starting off with a quick joke. Because, to really understand how humor works, we kind of have to experience it firsthand. So, a pessimist sees a dark tunnel. An optimist sees light at the end of the tunnel. A realist sees a freight train. And the train driver, well, he sees 3 idiots standing on the tracks. So, why exactly did that just make you smile? Or, at least chuckle internally? I really want you to think about that for a second. It wasn't just some random arrangement of words. Behind every single laugh, every giggle, and honestly, every massive eye roll at a dad joke, there is a very specific, deeply ingrained psychological mechanism just waiting to be unpacked. Today, we are going to literally dissect the anatomy of a joke. See, humor isn't just about goofing off. It's actually a highly serious academic discipline. Just look at how academics try to categorize comedy. They outline essentially 4 basic forms of a joke: the concealing of knowledge that's later revealed, the substitution of one concept for another, an unexpected conclusion to a logical progression, and of course, slipping on a banana peel. I love that! It perfectly captures how we try to logically categorize something as beautifully absurd as physical comedy. To make sense of all this, researchers basically break the nature of humor down into 3 core pillars. First, the features, which are the characteristics of the joke itself. Second, the functions, the actual purpose the joke serves socially. And third, the subjects, the topics we actually dare to joke about. By looking at these 3 elements, it's like a giant puzzle. We can start to see the hidden matrix behind our laughter.
Right, so one of the most absolutely crucial features of humor is this concept of incongruity and incongruity resolution. Basically, our brains are hardwired to recognize patterns. When we spot something out of place, an incongruity, we feel this subtle, nagging sense of tension. Think of seeing someone fighting a broken umbrella in a massive windstorm. It just looks wrong. We feel tension until we put things right in our mind's eye. And when our brain finally resolves that tension, the natural release valve is a laugh.
Let's test your brain's resolution skills right now. Take a close look at this dog. For a split second, you feel confusion, right? A little tension, because the head appears completely detached from the body. No way, right? Your brain is scrambling to make sense of this totally mismatched situation. Then you adjust your perspective, you realize the dog is just resting its head backward, and boom, you smile in relief. That is incongruity resolution in action. We also see this incongruity play out in narrative formats. Consider this classic prank to-do list. Buy 4 pigs, paint numbers 1, 2, 3, and 5 on their backs. Release them in Walmart. Sit back and watch security frantically search for number 4. The joke here entirely relies on the unexpected absence of that 4th pig. The tension is built by the missing number in the sequence, and the resolution is the sudden realization of the absolute chaos it would cause for those security guards.
And this exact mechanism brings us to a really great historical debate among philosophers. Why do we find these things funny? On one side, we have Thomas Hobbes, who championed the superiority theory. He argued that we laugh out of a feeling of sudden glory, feeling superior over someone else's misfortune or inferiority. But later thinkers like Francis Hutcheson pushed back on that. Hutcheson argued, well, we don't go to asylums to laugh at people, nor do we laugh at animals unless they're acting like humans. He countered that laughter is actually about that sudden insight of incongruity we just talked about. To settle this, academics use what we can basically call the banana peel test. Think about someone slipping on a banana peel. If they fall and are seriously injured, we definitely don't laugh. We're horrified. But if they aren't physically hurt, and especially if they were acting a little bit pretentious right before they fell, we laugh incredibly hard. Why? Because our expectation of their dignity violently clashes with the sudden reality of their clumsy fall. We're laughing at the sudden insight and their bruised pride, not just sheer superiority. Crucially, though, the sudden insight doesn't just apply to physical comedy, it applies to wordplay too. Think about linguistic banana peels, like Energizer Bunny arrested, charged with battery, or stealing someone's coffee is called mugging. The ambiguity forces our brains to instantly resolve 2 entirely different meanings for a single word. The absolute masters of comedy know exactly how to hijack this biological quirk. Comedians like the legendary Jonathan Winters used incredibly simple visual imagery, literally just holding a basic stick prop, and continuously transformed it through mime and character work. By constantly changing what the stick represented, he forced the audience to constantly shift their expectations and rapidly resolve new incongruities. It just generated wave after wave of laughter. But hey, humor isn't just for stages and comedians. It is a highly functional tool. Educators actively deploy humor in the classroom to teach vocabulary, relax anxious students, and encourage careful observation. When a teacher uses a joke, they're actually modeling problem-solving skills, showing students how to connect disparate ideas in real time. It's a real game changer for learning. Humor versus hate speech, finding the line. Now, if humor relies on tension and targeting pretension, how do we figure out where harmless release ends and actual harm begins? It's a tricky area. One way scholars look at this is through the concept of trial balloons. We often joke about taboo subjects to test out the social waters, sending up these trial balloons disguised as jokes to see what our peers secretly believe, all without having to commit to a serious statement. Academics actually measure the safety of these trial balloons using a theory called MICH, which stands for Moderate Intergroup Conflict Humor. This theory proves that you absolutely need some tension or conflict for a joke to work. If there's no tension, there's no release. But it heavily stresses moderation. If the conflict or tension is too high, it shatters the humor and creates discomfort or even fear instead. So when we're evaluating whether something is just a bad joke or if it's actually hate speech disguised as humor, scholars ask one ultimate defining question. Is the humor being used to weaken the target, or is it being used to strengthen the target? That is the academic litmus test right there. To keep comedy constructive and safely within the bounds of that moderate tension, researchers point to several humane humor rules. Let's walk through them. Rule number 1 is the golden rule of comedy: never target the victim. True humor highlights the absurdity of a situation, not the suffering of those trapped within it. Rule number 2 builds directly on this: never target a quality the target can't change. Joking about someone's inherent traits, their race, their physical disabilities, things totally outside their control, removes the element of playful insight and crosses directly over into cruelty. And finally, rule number 3, target only a person's best qualities, not their worst. In other words, punch up, not down. Focus the humor on a person's strengths, their excessive pride, or their pretensions, rather than exploiting their genuine vulnerabilities. When you follow these rules, humor remains an incredible tool for connection rather than division. Navigating these rules requires such a deep, intuitive understanding of human empathy and social context that it actually sparks one of the biggest debates in technology right now. Can AI essay writers or algorithms ever truly understand satire, irony, or sarcasm? Because humor isn't just data, right?
It's a shared human experience based on unspoken social contracts. Ultimately, we are truly humor sapiens. Think about absolute legends like Charlie Chaplin or Groucho Marx. They remind us that we are an entire species defined by our unique ability to use comedy. We use it as a coping mechanism in dark times, as a social glue to bond with complete strangers, and as a sharp weapon of intellect to challenge power. Which brings us to our final takeaway. It's incredibly easy to sit inside a broken carrier and completely ignore the fact that the cage door is entirely detached and sitting right behind you. If you only focus on the problem, you might just miss the easy solution. Humor trains our brains to constantly recognize incongruity. It exercises our mental flexibility, helping us think outside of the box so we don't get stuck staring at the walls of a cage that doesn't actually exist. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Now that you know the anatomy of a joke, how will you use humor to shift your perspective today? The next time you find yourself laughing out loud, take just 1 second to stop and ask yourself why. What was the incongruity? What was the tension? Analyze your own laughter and see what it teaches you about your own hidden perspectives. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep looking for the punchlines.